Well, Tyler, thank you so much for joining the show, and excited to visit with you once again. I was a guest on your podcast here recently to promote my book, and really excited to have you on here today. Kind of an extension of that conversation that we've already had, but I want to start just to give our audience a little bit of a preview of who you are. I know you've had a career in sports, but it's kind of a career in two parts. You've worked in business in the sports world, kind of in your first decade post college, and then here in the last decade, you've worked a lot with teams and elite performers. And so, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of like your progression in sports and kind of the work that you do now.
Sure. I think, was a high school student athlete and had an opportunity to play college football at the University of Northern Iowa years ago, which was a great experience, and used that to get a business degree. And usually I always kind of joke, one of the things I learned in business school is that I didn't want to work for most of the businesses. And I think I just always been around sports my whole life. And I remember, talking to someone even as a college football player that I would just even go to a visiting stadium and have this weird thought, I wonder what that sponsorship's about. Why is that sign there? And I think as my college football career kind of, winding down in that phase, I still had this fascination of the Wizard of Oz as a kid, of the behind the curtain in sports. And I think that was really piqued by the business. I think kind of growing up in the Michael Jordan marketing age, we've seen kind of the explosion of sports industries across from youth sports to the marketing to shoes, whatever. And that really led me into opportunities in pro sports. I got an internship with the Chicago White Sox. Worked a short stint for Mike Ditka's arena football team in Chicago, and then went back, had a few years with the Chicago White Sox. Moved out to Colorado working for the Nuggets. And I think one of the coolest things, besides going to stadium and arena every day for work, which was as a little boy, you look back and this is so cool, was having some of those peek behind the curtain moments, being able to see pro teams warm up before the fans come in, and seeing some of these behind the scenes operations of how teams work, and really observing a lot of how some of the best athletes did things whenever you had a chance, and some opportunities to engage and ask questions. It was some people that coached and worked with those levels. It was a great experience. But later on, I think in pro sports, I just didn't find this fulfillment. I think my mom was a teacher and a coach, and there's a little piece of me that I always wanted to work with younger athletes. And I think some of the things that I struggled with and, was able to kind of overcome, wanted to go back and find fulfillment in serving kids and coaches through sports, and just kind of always navigated my way and find a connection. And I found that very fulfilling, and it's led me to some great opportunities with organizations and on my own, and meeting people like Evan through podcasting and things like that. But that's kind of my full background, and how I've kind of navigated through different phases of sport.
And so tell me kind of specifically, what do you do now? Are you working with athletes? Are you working with teams? Are you working with entire organizations and departments? Just kind of list out kind of the areas that you work in and specialize in right now.
Sure. So within my own business at Elevate, Educate, Rejuvenate, work a lot with high school football teams, college football teams, primarily student athletes. So sometimes in those student athlete leadership settings, whether it's with, student athlete advisory councils or high school kind of leadership groups, or leadership, conventions or summits that they put on for high school student athletes. I do a lot of those. And then Positive Coaching Alliance, which is a national organization that kind of also got my start in this a little bit ago, 10 years ago with them. I lead some education with them and do some partnership development. Really, and what they're about is trying to provide a quality developmental experience in sports for all kids, no matter where they are, economic, societal things. This is really trying to help provide coaches and kids with a quality youth and high school sports experience, so they can develop those skills that we want them to be able to kind of take into the world with them to be successful adults.
Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about some of the mental skills here in a second, but, when we kind of had talked about you coming onto my show, you had kind of talked to me about your interest in intangibles. Yeah. Obviously, I was promoting my book about intangibles on your podcast, but kind of talk to me about what intangibles has mean to you, or what you've seen in your work here over the last decade, and why did you want to come on here and talk intangibles with me?
Yeah, I think part of, my personal journey as an athlete, when I was a student athlete, I knew how to work hard. I think, that might be one intangible skill of effort, but I think it was the one that I was really good at. I could run till I, couldn't anymore. I could lift weights. But a lot of those other things as a high school student athlete, I struggled with maybe that leadership, sportsmanship, controlling my emotions, was things that in high school sports, I had to hone in on really quick if I was going to try to reach some of my goals as a college athlete. But as a youth athlete, I struggled with a lot of those things. I think, leaned on talent a little bit too much into kind of the high school area. And then when you show up on a college football team the first day, there's a lot more even talent, and the separators quickly become some of those intangibles. And so between some of those past experiences, struggling with maybe some of these intangible qualities, and then I think, really having to focus on them to generate the success I had as a college athlete and become a college captain, and leader, to really earn the respect of those people through the process. I've always found them, I think, translating into my real life, it's those things I can lean on, because I can't lean on my tackling skills anymore, or, my ability to read coverage doesn't come in handy on a day-to-day basis anymore. But those intangible skills that I was able to extract, develop, and, practice through the sports experience, was able to provide a lot for me later on.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I do want to touch on your college football experience
Sure.
here for a second, because for the audience that doesn't know, so Tyler, you played at Northern Iowa University for their football team, and you were there at a really interesting time during kind of the early stages of Mark Farley's tenure at Northern Iowa.
Yeah.
He's been there, I think, for close to 20 years now as the head coach there. And pardon me if I have this wrong, but Division I AA, one of the top teams in Division I AA over the last 20 years, has won multiple conference championships, and I believe won a couple of conference championships while you were there. And he was not the head coach at the program when you arrived. So kind of just talk about what you noticed maybe about his leadership, or maybe the change in the program that's kind of set the foundation for the success that they've experienced here in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to play for Mark. Like you said, I think he's one of the longest tenured coaches at Division I football right now, which is extraordinary in a day and age of, short-term kind of tenures and goals. It was an interesting process. I think I've told this story, I think, a lot to college coaches, high school coaches, and it seems to be one that is unique, especially when you talk about the turnover of coaches in the hiring process. But yeah, I was recruited by a different coach. That coach left right after the redshirt year in the fall, and they were hiring a new coach, and the school brought in their 5 candidates. And I think the unique part was the athletic director gave the football team an hour of questioning with each of the 5 candidates. And, I think 4 of those 5 candidates really came in looking back. They said, you want Nike, I'll give you Nike. You guys want to do this, we'll do that. We need to get you a new locker. It was a lot of these things that maybe you wanted to hear during the recruiting process, and kind of the shiny sparkle. And Coach Farley came in and really gave us more of a truth. And I think, at that time, we hadn't won conference in 4 years. After they won conference 7 straight years, they weren't making the playoffs. He came in and kind of gave us some hard truths about our defense and our culture. And at the end of that, we got to rate the coaches, 1 to 5 from the ranked him. And the next day they turned around and said, you get number 5 as your coach. And, I think, as a team, you kind of looked at each other like, did they value our input? But I think it was more of, we didn't value his output, what he was sharing with us. And because he started with those hard truths and he didn't start with the fluff, he was able to earn our respect quicker and develop, I think, the culture that he wanted to put in. And some people didn't buy in, enough bought in that first year we won conference and went to the national quarterfinals. So then the buy-in was pretty quick. And I think the next year was, the only other year he's had a losing record. We went 5-6, bounced back in the next year and won the conference again and went to the national semifinals. So, or I'm sorry, quarterfinals, semifinals the first time and quarterfinals the second time. So, that was kind of the experience. But I think so many teammates, he's just been a wonderful influence. His coaching tree is amazing. I think he's able to, at that level, get some great coaches. mad respect to North Dakota State University and the Bison, but they love to take some of Coach Farley's coaches and build their programs. So mad respect to them. They were not in the conference when I played. So that's been a great addition just to see the conference, high tides, right? The high tides raise all the boats, right? But yeah, they like to take some of our coaches.
Well, that's what happens. I mean,
I know. I
especially
cheer
in
for them
college
over there
athletics,
too.
you have a little bit of success and everybody's trying to, steal a little bit of that from you. So, one thing I really liked about what you just said, and I found this in athletes, and you mentioned the recruiting aspect, right? Like those 4 coaches came in and they're kind of pumping you guys up and they're like, oh yeah, you want a Gatorade fountain in the locker room? Yeah, we're going to do it. And that all sounds great, but it really doesn't mean anything. Right. I would argue that University of Texas football has probably had the nicest football facilities in the nation for the last decade, and it really hasn't meant much. And I think what I loved about what you talked about with Coach Farley is like, he's coming in from day one and being brutally honest with you guys. Yeah. And I think that like, this is something that a lot of athletes miss out on right now because there is such a premium put on the recruiting. And the problem is, I'm going to steal a line from David Shaw, Stanford head coach right now, but you need to start as you mean to go on. And I think one of the issues I'm seeing in college athletics is coaches are acting like friends to players, and players may like that in the short term when they're 17 years old. But if we're talking about reaching our potential or reaching our highest level, that's not what it takes to reach your highest level. Yeah. And I've found that even though players may like to be recruited, they crave discipline. And it sounds like from day one, not only was Coach Farley kind of setting the very high standards and being honest with you guys, but also kind of maybe creating that culture of discipline. Just talk about how that culture changed in kind of the years from your freshman year to the time you graduated.
Yeah, I love that David Shaw quote again. Say it again. What was it?
His quote is "Start as you mean to go on."
Yeah, I think thinking about what we just talked about with Coach Farley, that was true. And I think coming out of spring ball, a lesson that I've shared with coaches, and when I was a college coach for a little bit, we use this example a lot with kids as well, and in my own conversations with student athletes when they're kind of facing that too. But I think I came out of going into my junior year out of spring ball is kind of like, I'm the starter, I'm the man, and I'd overcome a bad injury my freshman year in my vertebrae and was really high and confident. And we had that exit spring ball meeting with coaches, and Coach Farley told me that honesty continued. And he said, your job as a player is to still be the number one safety when you go through camp in August. My job as a coach to make sure I find and have the best safety. So I'm still looking. And I was kind of like, man, it's a short summer. They're still going to bring someone in. And they did. And the person they brought in was also Biathlon Sports, a second or third team preseason All-American before they had really joined our team. One of a great teammate, but I had to beat him out. And coach told me the truth. He's going to bring someone in to compete. And he told me where I stood. And I did that. And after my junior year, we won conference. We went to the national quarterfinals, had a great spring ball again, had that conversation. He told me the same damn thing. Your job is to be the best safety in August. And my job is to make sure I find and have the best safety in August. He brought in another dude. This dude was first team All-American Biathlon Sports. I had to beat him out. And I did both times. They were both great teammates and played together. And I still keep in touch with both those people. But he was honest with it. I think if he would have just brought them in without telling me where I stood, I think he gave me enough challenge to work. And I think that's what being honest pushed me to not rest on my laurels. And I think it's so easy to do that when you feel like you finally have gotten that position, and you've worked in college and NFL sports, you know how quickly those things can change. And I think it also, what it provided me to in that moment was both those guys, how do I be the best teammate to them? Because I still had to teach them and help them learning the defense. I couldn't just be a jerk and not help them out, because one play away, they are the starting safety. And whether I decided to lead and be a teammate and nurture their ability that could serve our defense the best. I think that was one of the best things it taught me in the process, was you can still compete with someone and still enrich each other and make each other the best for your defense. And I think that was kind of, looking back, one of the hidden blessings of that experience.
Did the program kind of bring that out in you, or did they teach it to you?
I think we did. I mean, coach was establishing his cultural standards, but I think that was kind of in the program's culture before I got there. I think I felt, even though our defense changed a lot, when I felt like when I was a freshman, there was this, we had a big brother system, like who was our mentor. And then I think that even when we competed, we tried to teach and work, as a defensive back unit. I always felt like they were trying to help me. If you made a mistake, the ones were like, hey, let me show you, let me tell you, watch that, and give you little helps with your keys. And so that was definitely part of, I think, a foundation of, I think, any winning culture. But from my high school to college culture, that was different. And that, you can compete and collaborate to be the best at the same time.
Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps hearing you talk about this, because like I'm very passionate, obviously, about intangibles, and this speaks to a lot of things that I get really fired up on. Right? Like, there is an element in coaching that, yes, I'm recruiting you. I want you to be here. I want you to be successful. But like, I can't sit back as a coach and think, oh, we have this position tied up because Tyler's here. He's going to be here the next 3 years. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. There are no guarantees in the high performance business. And so like, I love the way that they were communicating with you guys and still letting you know that like everything is good. Like, yep. I still trust you and I want you to succeed, and I'm going to like push you to succeed. But at the same time, like, if I can get a very talented player in here, like, I'm going to go get that player. And that is a coach's job. I think, like, I don't want to get off on a tangent about the current state of college sports, but there is definitely a difference in this generation right now where it's like they're looking for theirs. They are looking for the immediate payoff. And, with money at play now, like, it is different. And I will acknowledge that. However, there are these tremendous lessons that sports kind of teaches us and that we learn through sports, specifically to staying with something, continuing to get better, taking experiences, whether they're good or bad, and continuing to improve and strive to get better. Let's transition here and kind of talk about some of the work that you're doing, because I know like teaching mental skills is a big part of the work you're doing now, and like responding to the successes and the adversity like you just talked about. Adversity obviously comes in many forms. You weren't dealing with life-threatening issues or huge injuries or anything like this, but all the same, like, you want to be the starting safety, you want to be a key factor on that team, and nobody's guaranteeing you anything. So just kind of talk about the way that you maybe use some of your experiences to teach these mental skills, and kind of like, what do you think is most important when you're working with a team or a set of athletes in terms of developing this mental toughness and this resiliency?
Yeah, I think, from my own experience to kind of what I teach, I think, it's one of the just, fundamental cliche things you hear was control the controllables. It's a broad brush general thing. And then it's like, all right, well, what do we control and what don't we control? And I think one of the things I love about your work and the intangibles is that I think digging into them gives coaches a better understanding of how to coach and how to be a better team. But I think also when we look at them, I use this analogy sometimes with kids when I'm teaching them mental skills, is that it's sometimes like a cheeseburger, right? Like if I had every player on the team design your perfect burger that is just everything's for you, right? I'm going to get a lot of variety. Maybe we got different types of meat, different types of gluten-free bun, lettuce wrap, toppings, sauces. But again, if you listen to those things, the core elements of burger are going to be there. Patty, some toppings, some sauce, some seasoning, and all those things, the core mental skills are usually the cliche things we talk about. But it's really perfecting, all those little details of your burger and your skill that is going to fit you for performance. in a lot of those things, whether it's, your routine, how you do your routine, athlete to athlete is going to vary based on how you're finding your perfect place for performance. So I think the intangibles, it's really like sometimes like, how do we build our perfect burger or, our perfect performance mindset with, we know these core variables are going to be there, but we do have to experiment and tinker and tweak, do I like mustard or bacon or what, what do I need in there to be at my best? So I use that analogy a lot with kids, just to let them know that you can't perfect mental skills quickly. You're always going to adapt. And though I might not like a double bacon burger now, I might be doing bison with a lettuce wrap 10 years from now. I don't know. And so we evolve and change some of our tastes and based on our past experiences. So the intangibles, I think, and I kind of wanted to hear your opinion on this, because a lot of times I think they become difficult to measure, right? We kind of categorize them and define them often that way. And I think also between a coach and an athlete, and this is why I'd love your opinion too, Evan, is they show up differently. And so if I'm talking with kids and developing mental skills, a lot of these themes that we come back to sometimes are around the self-esteem, self-regulation, self-conscious, self-efficacy. And from a mental skills or psychology, you're going to start building them that way. And then as a coach, sometimes, and you've been there, you're trying to evaluate someone's confidence, poise, their coachability. And to me, sometimes it's like, well, self-esteem is going to show up as confidence, and self-regulation is going to show up as poise, and self-efficacy is going to show up as skill acquisition and coachability. But do you think that is sometimes when trying to develop mental skills or these intangible qualities that, like when a kid shoots, hey, how do I be more confident? We have to get to that self part, but they are often getting evaluated by a coach with this macro confidence, poise, different terminology sometimes. But I think you've also been at the NFL level, where I think when you start to evaluate at the higher levels of football, you do hear those self words come into the analysis a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. First of all, love your burger analogy. Lot of room to run with that, and I love the evolution of craving a double cheeseburger to the bison burger later on in life. So, we'll need to revisit that maybe on another podcast. I love that. So, a couple of things with what you just said. You talked about self, and I think whenever we're talking about leadership is all about other people. But at the same time, it's really all about yourself, and specifically, like, how do you treat yourself? How do you lead yourself? And like what I'm hearing you kind of talk about, I guess in reference to being a performer or an elite performer, is very similar to the way that I think about coaching and leadership and developing those skills. Some of the things that I think about when it comes to self, and like, let me just like stick with like the leadership example for a second. Yeah. Yes, you need to develop these abilities to have the self-esteem that you are going to be confident, but you're also going to be humble. Right. So there's kind of like a duality to each side of this. Tom Coughlin has an amazing quote where it's confident enough to perform, humble enough to prepare. Yep. Right. And so it's kind of like you need both sides of the coin. And you can't just say like, oh, well, you need confidence. Like confidence comes from a lot of places. But ultimately, if you think that you've made it, you're not going to have that type of humility to prepare. So, this kind of leads me in when I'm talking specifically to leaders, like the number one thing that I see as almost like a disease within coaching and leadership is ego. Mm-hmm. And focusing on that ego and almost thinking that ego is confidence. Ego is not confidence. Ego is almost like thinking that you have nothing else to learn, thinking that you don't need to continue doing the exact same things that got you to the place that you are, and continuing to evolve. Back to your burger, your double cheeseburger to bison burger example, right? Yeah. And I think that is a huge piece when I'm thinking about kind of the leadership angle, is you need to have that ability to eliminate your ego and understand that while it is all about you, it's not about you. Yeah. And what goes hand in hand with this is like admitting your own mistakes, and like your ability to admit your own mistakes shows that you know that you're not perfect and you don't have all the answers. The great Frank Gans Sr., who I coached with at SMU, used to always say, who here is a finished product? None of us are. Right. Including Coach Gans, who was without question the best football coach I ever was around. And so I think that like when you start thinking about it, and I'm talking specifically about intangibles, do you have this ability to look within yourself and continue to want to push to a higher level? Do you have that ability to humble yourself and say, okay, I was the starting safety last year. And this is what I really loved, why I got goosebumps with you sharing what Coach Farley told you. It's like, hey, that was a great season, Tyler. Are you done? Are you finished? Are you satisfied? And like that ultimately, I'm sure, not only permeates you and like the way you attack your work, but that starts to permeate your position room and all of the other guys you're competing against. And like you're the starter and you're going out of your way to help those guys be prepared for if their opportunity comes, knowing full well that you preparing them potentially is setting you up for personal, maybe a personal setback. But in the grand scheme of like the culture and the team, you're really kind of like improving the overall collective. And so a lot of this goes back to the way that you handle yourself. And I think like ultimately it's about, sports is so much about random events and setbacks. And not only like dealing with them, but dealing with them and becoming better than what we were before. And I think this goes whether you win or you lose. And I tell people like you approach things the exact same way. The value of failure and also dealing with success, it's really, you're approaching things the exact same way. Like you take the results out of it, you look at where things went well, why they went well, and you look at where things didn't go well, and you understand how they can get better and how you can continue to improve and get better. And that is the common theme that you see in all elite performers in all of the truly great teams. I'm not talking about Antonio Brown. I'm not talking about somebody who's just super talented and like who literally can just step on a field and be the best player on the field. I'm talking about Tom Brady. I'm talking about Steph Curry. I'm talking about guys that have this relentless pursuit each and every day on being their best today, because today is Wednesday practice. Like I'm not worried about Sunday. Sunday's going to come, but I can't be my best on Sunday until I give everything I have in this Wednesday practice or this Wednesday meeting. So I don't know if that even addressed your question, but like that, those are the things that I start thinking about. It's like within ourselves, we can have the ripple effect of our intangibles by the way that we respond to each of our individual situations and what we're going through.
Yeah, no, I love what you had to say there. I think so much too. And like, it's on leadership, when it's on that idea of self, like what's your selfish versus selflessness. And I think, just in my own like DB room example, I had to find that balance. I had to, be selfish that, I can earn the spot, but I could be selfless enough to help your teammates, so that you have the strongest defense possible. And I think as you play football and your body gets beat up, you learn how quickly one play can change things. And if you just have to get taped up, man, I want that dude to be able to hold the series down and get the team off the field. And so I think I love what you had to say about just some of the leadership. And I think when you can bring up, maybe did we bring up AB and Tom on our podcast? I think we did bring up for a flash or something. But talking about team culture, Brady and just that buzzword, it's everywhere, but it's cliche because it's true in sports. When you build a strong culture, I think I always look at kind of the Patriots and then the Bucks with Tom. But when you have a strong culture, people used to question the Bucks or the Patriots when they brought in Randy Moss. That was the dumbest, I remember we were young, but it was like, this is a silly idea. Like this Randy Moss guy, he's kind of a loose cannon. And there's other players throughout the years that the Patriots brought in that weren't having success for maybe intangible reasons off the field. And they had such a strong culture that when people join their culture, they're able to be part of that culture and not distract from it. And I think when you have a strong culture, you can take risks but also when you have a strong enough culture, you can help those develop faster. And I think, just shows, I think, as an aggregate, when you look at teams, and then obviously Tom goes to the Bucks, you can take some risks on an AB, because guess what? Their culture is still clicking and AB still doesn't have a shirt. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, when we start talking about culture and these things specifically, like that is ultimately the key piece in all of this. People look at especially pro sports because it's so in our face with highlights, and we focus on stats and really like the play that we can watch on Twitter in a 10-second clip. And we think that that's elite performance. But like very few people understand the dynamics that are at play behind all of those things, right? Like there's a reason why really only 6 teams in the NBA or the NFL are really kind of contending year after year after year. And it's like there's other teams that are picking at the top of the draft every year. They're drafting really talented players. But it's also like this idea of the collective and that your people become your culture. And I think like, there's different phases of building a team. And obviously, if you're in the situation where you have older guys that have won, guys that definitely bring those intangible characteristics to your team, like they have the ability to have that effect on those around them. And I had Joan Ryan on my podcast a little while ago. She wrote a book on it called Intangibles as well. It was really about baseball teams, the San Francisco Giants in particular.
Okay.
And she talked about how certain players were kind of messes in other clubhouses, but they got to the Giants and they were really good teammates. And it might just be for a season or 2 seasons, but like when they were on the Giants, like nobody had any problems with them. And like there's this element where if you are, let's just say like you misbehave, right? Like you're going to break rules. You're going to kind of do whatever you want to do because you're Antonio Brown and like, you're going to play anyway. Well, if you're on a team that doesn't have a strong culture, like there's other people that are also breaking the rules, that are also kind of like huddled in the corner with you. On teams like in Joan Ryan talking about the San Francisco Giants, what she was kind of referencing is like there are 24 people in this clubhouse that are in lockstep with each other. And they bring in the quote unquote troubled player. And what happens is the first time that player kind of like crosses the line or breaks a rule, like they quickly find out that, oh, I'm by myself. Like I'm going to break the rules. And like people are coming up to me telling me that that's not okay, telling me that that's not the way they do things here. On the bad teams, that doesn't happen. Like the guys all go in the corner like, man, yeah, Coach Burk's messed up. Oh yeah, you think so too, Tyler? Man, how dare he yell at you and hold you to high standards at practice, man? Right. We're all just out here trying to get paid. Yeah. Like that is the mentality that you have on most teams. But on the really great teams, the truly great teams, like those guys step out of line and like there's Tom Brady there, or there's Mike Tomlin there, or there's whoever it is, Steph Curry, saying like, hey, we don't do things like that here. Yeah. And they quickly find out that like, if I'm going to behave the way I've always behaved, I'm going to be literally an outcast by myself. And nobody wants to be like that. Yeah. That's why on the poor teams, those guys kind of like congregate in the corner. It kind of splits the locker room or the clubhouse. But on the truly great teams, everybody in the locker room is kind of withholding that standard and maybe like elevating that standard, elevating the people around them. And they don't allow for other people to come in and kind of do their own thing. And those guys quickly find out either I get in line with everybody else or I'm going to be out of a job. And ultimately those leaders, those teams make those decisions that like, I don't care how good Antonio Brown is, like we can win without them. And that's what you see in the truly elite teams, the teams that consistently win at the highest levels of professional sports.
Big time. I think one of those other, I guess it falls into that intangible coaching space, is that they're looking for this what they call buy-in a lot, right? How do I get buy-in? How do I get buy-in? And it drives me bonkers when coaches, because I'm like, all right, well, what are you selling? You want them to buy it. What are you selling? And I think the first thing I was telling coaches too, I was like, are you a seller? Or are you are you giving them equity in the culture? Because I think those good teams that you just referenced in good cultures, and I think there's at the NFL, there's standards and rules and regulations, but there's a societal team kind of element to it. And at the college level, I think the intangible skills that we can develop and lean on, as especially in football teams with big numbers and even teams with smaller. I was listening to a podcast. I know I talked about North Dakota State earlier, but I was listening to their head coach, Coach Ince, on a podcast, and he was talking about how much the team self-regulates the discipline. You know, when a guy's late or if a guy gets caught drinking, and he puts that onto the team on how they should handle it. And I think when the kids start to discipline each other and have to have those discussions of how are we going to handle this issue, it really reiterates the standards. It makes the kids hold them instead of the coaches. And when that's the culture continually, the kid that got disciplined for drinking as a freshman, he's going to be in that spot in that collaborative team room when the kid does 2 years later. And I think just being able to develop that in these great cultures. And it's like, you look at North Dakota State, they win a lot. And I don't think coach is asking for buy-in as much as he's giving the team equity. And I think when you give kids equity and really don't have titles of leadership, but allow them to lead, that's how you develop a culture. And for a student athlete, high school, college, or otherwise, how they can develop these life skills and tangibles that we want them to extract through the process.
Yeah. I'm going to reference David Shaw again. He talks about two things. He talks about, number one, positive peer pressure and how they have that at Stanford football. And that, kind of like you were just saying, like sometimes as young guys, we don't understand what it takes to be successful at the highest level, especially if you're coming from high school into big time college football or athletics. Sure. And I think like that's a big piece of it too. But another line that I love of David Shaw is we win because of our locker room. Yeah. Now, a lot of people would look at it and say, well, you had Christian McCaffrey. Well, you had Andrew Luck. Well, you had insert player's name, right? And that's going to be the case for any big time.
Or insert said player into their next one. How did that? Andrew and Christian's leadership translated.
Exactly.
Locker room to locker room.
Exactly.
Right, sorry,
and no, I was just going to, kind of say that this is what I noticed in my career was that like when I was studying, like any young coach, I'm studying everybody from Greg Popovich to Bobby Knight to John Gruden to, Bill Parcells, all the way down the list. And I think like what you start to really like notice in like specifically with like teams like the San Antonio Spurs, the New England Patriots, Alabama football with Nick Saban, David Shaw with Stanford football, you start to really notice that these guys put a premium on the people that are in their locker room. Do they have guys like Randy Moss who are, really, really talented? Like, yeah, of course. But like, the thing is, when we're talking about the NFL, like everybody's talented. Everybody is talented. Like you were just saying about like how they were bringing talented guys in to potentially replace you. It's like anybody that is playing college football was the best player on their high school team. And then anybody that's playing in the NFL was one of the one or two best players on the field every single Saturday when they were in college. And so it's like the difference in talent is so minuscule. And so like if everybody is basically playing with the same talent, what is the true separator? And this ultimately becomes the collection of the individuals, right? Like the culture of the teams, the locker room. And I think that I thought this for a long time in my career. And I think like as my career evolved and as I matured as a coach and was continuing to grow, I started to see like, oh, like it is the intangibles, it is the culture that these teams are creating that is their difference maker. Because ultimately, if you're talking about a Pac-12 player, that player can go to any team in the Pac-12, and every Pac-12 team is filled with quote unquote Pac-12 players. But yet like Stanford and Oregon continue to win. And yeah, they've got good players. Like that's part of it. But there's also another part of it. Like you mentioned earlier, it's unseen. You can't measure it. But if you've experienced it and you've been in those rooms, it exists and it's there.
I think even you drop Oregon, I think everyone thinks of them as the uniform school. But they also were taking kids' input in those uniforms early on. What do you guys want? What do you guys like? And I think that listening develops trust within a program. And yeah, they have cool Nike everything in their Oregon, but early on, I mean, listening to their kids, if you're going to do something, listen to the kids. And I think, involving them in that process eventually was, giving them something culturally that, yeah, outside looks like cool uniforms. Inside, it looks like collaborative team opportunity.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit, because like you're mentioning, like listening to the people that you're leading, or the people on the team.
Yeah.
There's obviously more to that than just like picking out uniforms. So like, what else have you seen, or like, what else are you thinking about, like when you mention that?
I just think it's, in the world we're in today with student athletes, whether you're a coach or you're a teammate, I think talking intangibles, I think that's one of the skills that I think I've tried to put intent behind. I think doing a podcast and asking questions and listening, it makes you work on those things. But when we listen to our kids, it builds trust. And too often with our athletes and teammates, we're talking, but we could said, I hear you, but I'm listening, but I don't hear you. I forget what movie that's from, right?
It's like everybody hears you, but nobody's being heard.
Yeah. And I think from my own experience with, high school student athletes and college student athletes, listening is one of the best things you can do to build trust, because it starts to open up so much more of who the person is. And if you're trying to be a coach, how to motivate them. And if I'm trying to get to know an athlete and how to motivate them and push them to performance, I got to know where they're at. I got to listen and understand their perspective and how they see the world and how they see competition and how they see adversity, if I'm going to be able to help them with any of that. And so I think using questions and spending time to listen and develop relationships is one of the fastest ways a coach can develop trust, and then down the road push them. Because I think every time I talk to coaches, I say you can only push a kid as far as they trust you. And so if you want to push each other harder, you have to develop trust first, so you can create challenges that'll work together for you. But you can only push them as far as you trust them.
I love that. For two things. First of all, Coach Ronnie Van Clark, when I was at SMU, I was 22 years old. He used to always say, the players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. 100%. And he said this so much that it almost kind of in a way like lost meaning to me as a young coach, but it didn't lose meaning. I just thought it was something that he was saying. I just thought it was a coaching saying. And it wasn't till I was older and honestly towards the end of my football coaching career, that I'd been in it a decade plus, that I then came to the realization of like, oh, like now I understand what Coach V was talking about. Like nobody is going to care what you know or what you've done unless you show care for them, unless they know that they can trust you. Yeah. And I think that was one of the most profound sayings of my coaching career that I witnessed. And a lot of the work that I did post coaching that I wish I would have known when I was 22, 23 is, number one, the power of asking questions, and number two, the art of listening. Yeah. Like these two pieces are missing in coaching, and there is no school or coaching development that coaches go to. So I'm glad you hit on both of those things, and it all feeds back into knowing who, you used the burger analogy earlier. Like I need to know what your best burger looks like. And that's what I was kind of thinking, even as you were saying it earlier, is like each person is going to have a different burger that they think is best. Yeah. But it's your job as a coach, as a leader, to understand that like, oh, this player likes bacon. Oh, but this player, needs a gluten-free bun, or this player is going to want a tuna sandwich. And it's like, I'm not trying to be funny with your analogy. I'm trying to be serious, because like each player is going to be different in the way that they need to be motivated, and the skills that they need to develop, and the intangibles that they need to develop. And so I think that's really on the leadership to kind of understand the type of players that you want, and ultimately what type of burger they want, or what type of skills that they need to be at their highest level, and what takes priority in their development. So I love everything that you're talking about, and I've seen it 100% in my work too.
And I always kind of like that burger analogy of just getting to understand someone, because then I think, like, why do you like mustard? Like I hate, it just creates diet, but there's a lot of nuance. And I think everyone's burger, and there's so much nuance in, your mindset, your leadership, your mental skills.
Well, I think also like, using like, why do you like mustard is actually like a good question to kind of use as like an analogy, because it's like Coach Farley was super blunt with you in those meetings, right?
100%.
Now, that doesn't necessarily vibe with everybody, and maybe he's trying to build a certain type of culture. But it also kind of like it's kind of like a data point for him, right? And for you too, right? Like he was very honest and upfront with you. And like from that moment, you could have either been like, man, forget Coach Farley. I'm going to call Coach Burk at North Dakota and see if he'll still take my call, see if I can transfer. Or you look at it like, okay, well, I'm going to show him. Like, you're going to go recruit somebody better than me. And there's like this way of knowing like what type of communication is going to work best with because some guys, like, they don't want the fluff. They don't want you to make them feel, it's like, coach, just tell me what you need. Like, just tell me that you're going to recruit somebody else. And like, if I don't step up, that's the deal. Other guys, they'll be threatened by that. So you need to, hey, come on, Tyler. Like, there could be other guys here in the future. Like, you need to continue. Now, ultimately, for the coach, they need to develop like the type of culture that they think is going to ultimately lead them to success. And he might have determined that, like, I'm going to be upfront and honest because I want guys with that growth mindset. And I agree with that. But there is an element of understanding like, okay, well, I'm communicating, but are they truly hearing what I'm trying to communicate? And I think that this is, I failed at this early in my coaching career. And I see this as a struggle for a lot of leaders and coaches currently.
I mean, looking back, I think people hear that story and like, oh, that was pretty blunt and honest. I was like, it was helpful. I'm like, I do also like in reflecting, him seeing if, following up, like, is that good with you? Like, I mean, is this, I'm being honest, but this was at my time. If I thought there was unfair questions or if this wasn't the best idea for the team to speak up. And I think, I kind of accepted that challenge. And like I said at the beginning, like I was a workhorse in the weight room and on the track. So if you're going to leave me with the team for 3 months in the weight room, I'm going to go do my thing in there and lead from that where I can. I'm going to lead from where I can in there. And that new guy won't be here yet. So that's something that I can do to put myself in the best position for when he comes in of how it rolls.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Love this. And, you've talked about Coach Farley and, I've mentioned David Shaw a number of times already on this podcast.
Favorites.
Let me ask you kind of like when you are thinking, and obviously I know you work with a wide range of age groups, right? From amateur, high school, college, pro. And so like when you're looking at leaders or elite performers or the teams that are doing it best, who do you look out there and kind of reference or who do you think is doing it right?
Good question. There's a lot of programs, a lot of coaches I admire. I think from far away, I don't know. I think a lot of the ones I admire are sometimes the ones I get more exposure to. Some of the coaches that I think I have some of the most admiration for, I won't name any on here, but that are older coaches that have evolved from kind of an older era of what used to be into the new era of athlete. I think those coaches, there's some good examples at, the FBS level. And I think, maybe Mac Brown would maybe probably be one of those that was this old school Texas guy and kind of this reverberance. And when you hear about North Carolina football, you hear about a good culture now. You hear about, the staff, about the people. So I think it's studying someone I've always admired is Dabo Sweeney. I've had the opportunity to kind of interact and work with some people through my podcast that work with some of those coaches. And so getting some insight and just seeing how, just like Coach Farley, candid they are and, what that does to create a culture of trust. Because I think that is just paramount with student athletes today with their flexibility to leave. They've kind of counteract the coach's ability to leave the portal and that kind of thing. And so if you can't develop trust, people will leave you. It's easier than ever to quit and leave places. So if you're going to invest all that time, I think we should invest it in developing trust with athletes. other coaches that kind of, I think, do that. I mean, I'm a big fan of David Shaw. Man, I'm trying to I could list a bunch, but also just kind of little nuances, I think. But Campbell at Iowa State, which is hard for me to say because I played against Iowa State 3 times and never wanted to say something. My dad and whole dad family went to that side, but that was the school that I don't like them. The only and
for no reason, just the color of their jerseys.
Yeah,
triggers you.
Yeah, no, but what Campbell's done at Iowa State, I think culturally, I think is amazing. I think to compete in the Big 12 with the kids he has, but you also hear the language that comes out. The other Campbell with the Lions, watching Hard Knocks, I love some of the stuff he has to say about accountability, positivity, optimism on their team, which is cool because his staff comes from experience. If you've been watching Hard Knocks of 80 plus years in the league, and what's their decades of experiences of telling them is this is a way to reach and connect with our team to make them better. We'll see how it works, but I think he's giving the team equity and instead of trying to get buy-in, he's giving NFL guys equity when he makes them run a practice.
Yeah. You just mentioned a moment ago, kind of, especially in college right now, right? It's easier to leave than ever. And one of the things that I've been asked is well, what do you think about the state of college athletics and specifically college football, having spent almost my whole career there? And I mean, there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can think this is oh man, this is the worst thing to ever happen. But the coach in me doesn't really you don't dwell on things like that. It's well, this is the new era of college athletics. And what are you going to do about it? And it's you can sit back and you can say, well, this is destroying doesn't matter what you think NIL or the transfer rules are doing to the game. You exist in this competitive environment and you have to compete, and no athletic director is going to give you a pass. So selfishly, obviously, I wrote a book on finding intangibles, which is all about building the culture that you want and getting the people in your program that represent the culture that you want. And the reason I reference this is oh, well, if it's easier than ever to get guys that leave, it's well, if you go get the ultra talented player who has been on the quote unquote top 100 lists at his age group in his state since he was 11 years old, he or she was 11 years old. Well, that tells you a little bit about them. They probably have a little bit of an ego. They probably are results oriented versus process driven. They probably have a fixed mindset. So when things get hard, guaranteed they're jumping ship. They're going somewhere else because they know they can go get the love, quote unquote, that they desire and just go to the next coach. What you're really looking for is you're looking for those players that not only exemplify the type of culture you want to build, but that have that growth mindset that when the going gets tough, when the coach sits down in front of them and says yeah, love your contributions to the team. Honestly, we're going to go get players that are more talented than you. They want the players that are that's fine, coach, but they ain't taking my spot. And those are going to be, everybody says, well, Nick Saban gets the best players. Well, if you saw how much time and effort the Alabama coaching staff puts in to not only going out and getting the best players, yes, they have super talented players, but they pass on a lot of talented players because they know they're not going to be successful there.
No doubt.
So I think a lot about that.
I think that's a great point about Alabama, because I think it's they don't they get the top talent, but they don't, to your point, they don't make a lot of misses. Right. No. I mean, those guys come and they get into their system, and he's not afraid to say, I'm here to develop you for the NFL. And he's good at it. And his staff is good at it. And he's had, I think the other thing that when you talk about coaches that are admired, I don't know Nick Saban. I know people that have worked with them and seen some behind the curtains and stories, but I think when it comes to his staff, how many different staff members has that dude had in winning those titles? Dozens. And they come into the system. Yeah. A lot of them are highly successful coaches from good areas and sometimes short term, but between the ones that become head coaches, the staff turnover that he manages is also respectably crazy.
Yes.
And I think that's something that also is overlooked at a long-term success like them.
Big time. And like also the development of coaches. Like he is, not a lot of coaches do this. And this comes from Belichick, right? Because Belichick developed Saban, but like Saban does the same thing. He is developing guys. He doesn't look at it as like, well, I'm going to get Evan in here. I'm going to plug him in here and let's see if he elevates. It's like, I'm going to have to elevate Evan. Like I'm going to have to make this coach into like an SEC quality assistant coach or coordinator or whatever. And like, he understands that as the leader and doesn't make excuses for it. Another thing, like Alabama, super talented. You're telling me that Florida, Texas, Ohio State, and USC don't have the same level of talent? I will sit here right now and I will tell you that those teams are more talented in terms of skill than Alabama. But what Alabama does is they put a lot of time and effort into making sure the guys they bring in have the right fit, both culturally and within their system, and that they have the right mentality, that they have the right intangibles. They spend all of their time talking about that. And you know what? Like this is part of like the thing everybody's like, well, Saban's crazy. And it's like, yeah, because when he walks into a school, he doesn't walk straight to the head coach's office and talk to the head coach about that player. Because every player that's being recruited by a Division I school, like I can already tell you what the head coach is going to say. They're going to say like, oh, he's great. Oh yeah, I love his work ethic. But you know who's not going to tell you that just on automatic is the vice principal.
Yeah.
Is the registrar, the people at the registrar's office, is the academic counselor, right? And like you have to spend that time to go talk to those people, and that's exactly what Nick Saban does.
Yeah, I gotta get rolling here in a sec, but one story on that point I wanted to share. I thought was it's one I've shared with college athletes, and when I was on the staff here at Northern Colorado, I was our NFL liaison. So when the scouts would come through, they would ask. First thing out of their mouth, they would come to me to ask about intangibles, right? They were, show me their grades, but it was a lot of intangible talk that they wanted to dig into. And one of the other things was actually a couple years ago, I ran into this scout when he came through, but I had met him several years ago at UNI when I was watching a practice one day. And I asked him how he liked to dig up dirt on potential NFL players. And he gave me one of the greatest responses that it's like, how do you find out this stuff? Where do you go dig and pry at? Because just like you said, like I know what the coach is probably gonna say, and I want to see how they are. And he said, well, he goes, it's really easy. He goes, when I go around the country as a scout, he goes, every time I go to a college town, he goes, every day I got to eat food. And so I usually ask the coach or whoever I've talked to at the university, where are the places, where do the football players go eat the most? And he said, I would go into every college town and find out from the coach where the two little popular spots were for the football team to all go grub as a team. And I would go eat there. And then I would ask the wait staff and the manager, do the football players come here? What do they treat you like? How do they treat the other customers in here? When they get recognized, are they nice to kids? And all those kinds of things. And I thought it was really interesting of how he pried on intangibles and wanted to see their character off the field and at a place where they might be able to feel like they have a little cachet or swagger. And so it was always a really great idea. And then came full circle that one day I was eating at a restaurant in our college town and having food with a coach over there. And we noticed there was a table of about 15, 16 of our guys eating at the other side of the restaurant. And by the time we got up and went over, all the guys on our team had left the restaurant and the waitress was there cleaning up the table. And I was like, here's my shot to ask and find out about my guys. And I asked the waitress and I looked at the table first. They left it in a pretty decent manner. They weren't pigs. And then I asked the waitress, I said, how was this table? Did they treat you well? Were they nice? Were they polite? And she said, they couldn't have been nicer. They were one of my nicest tables the entire night. And I was just like, so proud to coach those kids. And I think, for whatever their record was, that was still kind of one of the proud moments that as a coach, you're like, I'm glad they go out in the community like that and represent. So I thought it was for coaches and kids listening. From what I've always found, there's always someone watching everywhere and they'll find out about your intangibles one way or another.
Yeah. The invisible people always know the true story. So I love that.
Hands down.
Well, Tyler, I know you got to go, but before we get you out of here,
Yeah.
you are approaching, or I think you have completed 100 podcast episodes on your podcast. First of all, congratulations, an awesome accomplishment. And just want to hear, what have you learned on the road to 100? Like, is there any type of takeaways? I know that's a large question. I don't even know if I could answer that for the first 40 episodes of my show, but is there anything that pops out to you, or maybe like, what are you most proud of over the first 100 episodes of your show?
Yeah, I think things I've learned like that's gonna have to like probably be a book here soon. I think there's so much, and I think I'm still like sometimes listening to old ones and learning. But I think the one thing I've found is people that are authentic. I think I've met new connections and new great people through kind of that endeavor, like yourself, Evan, and so many others. And I've chased down people that I really look up to and have written books and been successful, worked with Nick Saban, worked with Dabo Sweeney, gone to work with Sean McVay. And what I've found is I think some of the best people, that have worked with some of the best athletes in the world and the best coaches in the world, when they drop into my podcast, sometimes I think I have an expectation or perspective of what this interaction or how that might play out. And I think so many of these people that are so successful in this leadership, mental skills space, and kudos and thankful to so many of my guests, is they're authentic and they're genuine and they come on to serve people. And creeping on 100 episodes, I just had my first time ever. A guy replied to me and was like, well, what's your distribution and how many people do you have listening and what's your Twitter following? And I literally was kind of like, maybe you're not a good fit, because Trevor Moad and John Gordon and Ben Newman and Evan Burk and all these people, they wanted to come on and be authentic, help student athletes, share a good message, and do something to elevate everybody else in the field that's trying to do something similar within sports. So grateful to everyone like you that I've got to meet through it. And I think it's probably one of the greatest lessons, just in a quick reflection, and, keep tuned for the full book TBD.
Love it. Well, you can come back on and promote the book when you write it, and we can dig into those first 100 episodes. But
yeah, Evan's writing a book, so he'll probably have to give me some pointers on extracting that with his experience.
Oh man, don't even get me started, dude. We're trying to get out of here. But Tyler, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to join me today. This was really, really cool and a fun conversation. And thank you for everything that you do for elevating student athletes and teams. So just thank you for taking the time today.
Appreciate it. Can't thank you enough for getting an opportunity, Lo. I love talking to this stuff. We could probably record like 10 more episodes. So appreciate it. Thankful to be here, and can't wait to interact with you again in the future as well.
Awesome, man. Well, until next time, take care.